Hello, and welcome to episode 16 of Patio Perspectives. This is our monthly, sometimes bi-monthly series in which I, Paul Salinger, as the host, interview other sustainability leaders, mostly in the event business, but sometimes not. And we record these and then we publish them for you to view at your leisure. I'm really excited about today's episode because we're at that point, start of a new year, start of a new political administration in the United States. Um, there's a lot going on, and this is really a time to kind of reflect and look at and think about what is our purpose and what is our intention going into the new year? How is it going to affect our work? And so today's episode, we're going to be talking a little bit about purpose. We're going to be talking about intention. We're going to be talking about how we heal our inner landscapes in order to heal our outer environment. Yeah, let's get started. I'm excited today to have Marley Finnegan as my guest. Marley is an event sustainability expert and founder of Purpose and Purpose Net Zero. She's the creator of the Blueprint Within podcast, Conscious Concepts for Regenerative Futures. Marley believes we must heal our inner landscapes in order to heal our outer environment. She is a regenerative systems thinker and student of Mother Earth with over 200 plus hours of sustainability focused innovative systems education. A sustainability expert with an excellent knack for human connection, she fosters a deep desire to provide solutions to Earth and humanity's biggest challenges, including the one in which we must be able to see our most optimal future in order to enable it. Marley Finnegan, welcome to Patio Perspectives.
Wow, Paul, thank you so much. That was definitely a lot for you to take on. So sorry about that. I'm
Oh,
really grateful to be here. I was so grateful to be in community with you just a little bit over a week and a half ago in San Francisco. So thank you so much for the invitation to join you for this 16th episode.
yeah, and I think today, we'll talk a little bit about the Chase event and maybe have a chance to dive a little bit deeper into what we said there because we had such limited time for the content portion. So, most of what we talk about in the event sustainability space is how to start or what actions to take. But at the recent Chase event, where you were part of the panel, we went a little deeper into how to feel about this work and how to find purpose. Your company has purpose in the title. So, what motivated you to look at purpose as the driving value of your company?
That's a really great question, Paul. And it's really kind of multifaceted, both personally and professionally. In 2020, I would have what I would call a spiritual awakening. And at that point, I had a 1-year-old child. It was the start of a pandemic. And obviously, everyone in the world was greatly affected by the mental health and physical health implications of that extremely trying time. And I got really into meditation at that time. And I had a vision of my then 1-year-old child at the age of 18 asking me why I didn't do more to help the earth.
Mhm.
And that alone really was the catalyst for me to change everything about the way that I approached my career, my personal life, my goals and my vision for the person that frankly I want to be in the world. And at that time, I was really and I am a lifelong learner. I'm obsessed with learning and intaking as much as possible around the way that the systems around us and that we operate in work and why. And at that point, there was a lot of conversation around Gen Z coming into consumeristic mindsets and being a part of brands consciousness around this next new consumer, future consumer. So realizing that between Gen Z and millennials, we were dealing with the most purpose-driven cohort of individuals and generation in history, both in terms of values and in terms of, consumer practices. And I really dislike even labeling or the word consumer. It's like, no, we're human. But
Right.
the truth is, I really felt this through line between both businesses that were already doing good and being conscious, and them being studied by Harvard over decades of time as being more actually sustainable in terms of revenue and profit and growth, in ways that were steady. So it was a culmination of all those things. My friend Noel Murphy has this saying that when you have an established sense of identity, belonging, and purpose, you can overcome anything. And even when your identity and belonging become compromised, purpose can still pull you through. So this concept of purpose is really what I believe is almost like the compass to which our soul is working towards. And when we have a solid sense of purpose, we have a more solid sense of self. But I also believe that purpose can be sort of overhyped, that it has
Right.
to be this grand mission where you're like changing the world. And really, I think that we can be, as mothers, as neighbors, as lovers, we can have purposes of all different varied shapes, sizes. And I also believe we can deeply transform our purpose, and that we can repurpose our purpose over time. And even with my company's both name purpose, my purpose is ever changing and continually evolving.
Yeah.
So I think that's a lot of ways to answer one simple question. But I like to kind of include that because I think also the notion of purpose can give us a lot of pressure also.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think that purpose is, an important value to have, and it is something that can evolve over time. It's sort of interesting. I'm doing a workshop right now, and in one of our sessions, we sort of identified what our word for the year was going to be. I did not choose purpose. I chose wellness, because wellness to me tied into my overall purpose for wellness and health, wellness in my love relationships, wellness in my emotional health and wealth, and just all these various different components of my life. And to go into those with a certain amount of purpose and intention, as opposed to just checklists of things to do. Um, so I love the answer, and I think that you're right that it can evolve as time goes on, and that this is a good time of year for us to think about what our purpose and our intention is going to be. Because as event professionals, we spend most of our time thinking about and caring for stakeholders and our attendees, but little time taking care of ourselves. So, I'm curious of some of your thoughts on how we should do a better job of finding the time for self-care and letting the emotional side of our work have as much importance as the day-to-day tasks of our work.
That's such a great question. And the truth be told, if you would have met me in 2017, I was pregnant. I would at that time would have been, 6 months pregnant, running from place to place to place, doing 1.3 million in new business for this national event design firm. And I had this goal at that time of taking 10 minutes out of my day to meditate and to begin to meditate.
Mhm.
And oftentimes I would come home, and I mean, I was somebody that was on the go from the moment that I woke up, go run to work out, go run to do this, run to this networking event after work, run home, go to bed. It was, and I truthfully would tell myself, I can't find 10 minutes to do
Yeah.
the meditation. And frankly, the key that I think is sort of this bigger conversation to be had is this almost guilt or sense that when we prioritize ourselves, we're being selfish
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
self-focused, when really without the ability to care deeply for ourselves and give ourselves the time, space, and self-love that we need, it's really hard to give to others within our lives,
Right.
ways that we are able to, and give the most of ourselves when we're not able to show up fully. And I think there's a concept that I have really been trying to embrace these past few years around receiving. And I think it goes back to that sort of self-care and self-love, but like are we able to receive time given back to us, the
Right.
gift of time? Are we
Wow.
able to receive rest? Do we allow ourselves to nap without feeling guilty or shame? Do we allow like what our bodies are asking for, whether that be food, pleasure, otherwise, and just sort of this like destigmatization of caring for ourselves. But I think that it also is worth honoring that every single person is so different in terms of both the way they operate, the way that they, best show up at work or at home. So also identifying like how can you prioritize chunks of your time where you can be productive and you know that those are times where you can really get the most done, and also sort of destigmatizing and embracing the idea of off time and non-productive time and time during the business day where you take 20 minutes and go for a walk, or you take 20 minutes and take a drive and listen to a podcast, or you go and sit in silence in a room. So really thinking of your day and sort of chunking out time where you can commit to productivity and also commit to non-productivity, which frankly, I think for our minds and for our kind of connection to self is as critically as important as that productive time.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think for a lot of us, I know I went through this a lot, is like sometimes we feel like we don't deserve to have that time to ourselves, that, we have these pressures of getting things done, of people looking over our shoulders or whatever it may be. And that, part of it is that acknowledgement and recognition, like I deserve to have this time to myself. I deserve to be able to, you know, grieve over the climate or grieve over, the work that I'm doing, or, you know, try to generate hope for what I'm doing. So I agree that, chunking out time is an important aspect of what we're trying to do here. And that, you know, being in the service business, you know, we can't service people unless we sometimes service ourselves.
Absolutely. And I think, having been in the startup realm around conscious driven work and sustainability, it's been a really, really challenging road. But some of the biggest lessons that I have absolutely learned have been really just how deeply psychological this issue is, and how personal it is, because our industry is an industry of experts. The
Yeah.
majority of people, when they come into our industry, they stay in it. They become so good and so experienced at everything they do. So this really is this completely strategic shift in perspectives. And it really does require a zooming out to be able to look at this holistically, but also really it requires a lot of behavior change and change in terms of the things that we feel most secure in our experience about. So I think also just deeply being able to empathize with not only that our experience can feel threatened by doing things differently and by sustainability and the changes that we need to really desperately see in the world.
Mhm.
But also giving ourselves grace for the fact that it's okay to start new and start fresh and learn some different ways. And this shouldn't feel that your job security is an issue, or that you're threatened, and that if that's the environment and culture in which you're existing in within your company, then that's a different issue. But ultimately giving ourselves grace for these the plethora of crises that we're dealing with all at once, that deeply require us to like kind of root into our own ability to love and care for ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, and you mentioned it a couple of times now, this idea of lifelong learning, and I think, I'd love to touch on that a little bit more in terms of, one of the things that I'm always sort of a little bit, trying to talk to people about is, to stay curious and to not get too stuck in just, what's in front of me right now, but what's outside of that? What else can we learn from? What other industries can we learn from? What other, kind of like strategies can we learn from to bring into this work? And I think that you kind of have that same uh, approach to things. And so I'd love to hear your kind of comments on that.
Absolutely. I've taken a number of regenerative systems thinking and degrowth focused courses, which are really about reimagining the way that we live, reimagining our systems. I mean, for me, since I was young, the concept of exponential growth, it's not possible, it's illogical to me. So I've always kind of wondered about how do we continue down this path? And frankly, the path can't continue in the way that we are currently operating. So when I was in this course, Regen Intel, we did a lot. One of the first classes was an artist, and they were really truly an artistic visionary about storytelling for the future. And what became really amazingly clear to me was this concept of stationarity, which means that we can only create and envision what we have either lived in our lived experience or we've known from what we've been taught in past history. And right now, we're at an amazing point in human evolution where we have the opportunity to create something that we've never seen before. And not only the opportunity, but the necessity, because what we've created since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution is what has led us to where we are today with the current state of climate affairs. So what is exciting to me is just this notion that we have, this world is our oyster type scenario. And the more that I learn about sustainability and you get into regenerative systems and you get deeper and deeper and deeper, the more that you realize all of this is being learned, created, talked about, evolving in real time. Of course, we've had science that's been talking and warning of the climate for, quite a long time. But as far as the newness of possibility, this is a creation story. We're in it. And the world, both, in terms of necessity, but also astrologically speaking, this is getting into more of my spiritual beliefs, but Pluto is the planet of is the planet of transformation. And Pluto has just entered Aquarius, which is the sign of collective good. So basically, we're in a 20-year period of transformation and death to things that are not in service to collective good. Why does this matter? The last time that Pluto was in Aquarius was 250 years ago. It was the start of the French Revolution, the American Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution. It is literally the energy of revolution. So that excites me in the fact that we have opportunity to truly revolutionize the way that we see, feel, and show up to what we do in the world.
I love that we're getting into this conversation. You're the first person who's brought up astrology on Patio Perspective.
Yes. Yes.
Let's talk a little bit more about regeneration, though, because I think, there's been a lot of talk within the sustainability world around regeneration, whether it be rewilding, whether it be regenerative agriculture. How do you see regeneration fitting into kind of our overall work around event sustainability?
So I've had a huge evolution in my feelings about all things relative to things like carbon offset. And really where I have landed is the land of regeneration. Regeneration, more or less, is allowing Mother Earth to do what she does best, which Mother Earth, whether it be the soil or our oceans or the trees or the mangroves, is the ultimate queen of decarbonization and has been since the very beginning of time. And so much of what we're dealing with in terms of our completely outweighed carbon budget at this moment has been due to extreme degradation of Earth's landscapes. So, indigenous worldviews, indigenous thinkers, indigenous practices for very, 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 98% of human existence have stewarded these regenerative practices and maintain the symbiotic nature of our relationship with the carbon on Earth, right? So the way that I see it is really deeply that the more we can invest in nature and nature-based solutions, the more that we are able to, truly regenerate carbon sequestration at its finest. I think that with all the talk about AI technology and investment in climate tech and all this stuff, it's really wild because I just keep coming back to Albert Einstein's quote of, you cannot solve a problem with the same thinking that you use to create it. It's like humans and our thinking and our industrialized ways of being for innovation have caused this. And it's not that innovation is the enemy, but it's that maybe we should ask Earth what she would do instead of us humans continually barrel down our innovative solutions. Like, I really think that Mother Earth deeply has the answers to the problems that we seek. And we see it every single day through the sequestration processes of the ocean, of the, of the trees. So I have a great example, and I know we're going to talk about the Democratic National Convention in terms of an example in practice.
Yeah.
But, I interviewed Ed Coe, who is the head of Singapore tourism, and they had a great example of basically investing in the mangrove ecosystems as mangroves, bamboo. There's really highly regenerative plants that also sequester a lot of carbon while growing faster than most. So when we are able to invest in our local decarbonization strategies, that to me is the ultimate, whether that be social impacts around, moving food away from landfill to your local communities, or it be investing in a local mangrove habitat, or regenerative farming is a huge climate solution as well, which is much easier to invest in more urban areas. So those are my thoughts there, and I appreciate that question because I am deeply passionate about it.
Yeah, no, I think I think you're right, and I like the approach of like thinking about like we've seen over the years lots of CSR projects that might be doing something for the local community or doing something for like a girls and boys club or something like that. But this idea of investing in local communities by either restoring habitat or doing something that's more earth-based, whether it be planting trees, whatever that may be, sort of a natural solution might be something for event, professionals to think about in terms of their strategy for not only carbon offsetting, because that is a way of carbon offsetting, but just giving back to the community in a way that might be more long lasting than a very short term kind of project.
Absolutely. And I think one critical aspect of this that I hope that our industry is really starting to embrace is the engagement of the local community leaders in understanding what is it do they actually need? Like, what are you looking for? Are you looking for volunteerism, time, energy? Are you looking for, soil rehabilitation? Are you looking for ecosystem restoration? Are you looking for money? Like, what do you actually need? And I supported Destination Canada in their sustainability activations at PCMA last week. And what was really beautiful and amazing was realizing how many of their destinations have already gone through and vetted these local social impact organizations and leaders to be able to support event planners with that information at the ready, taking that that time and that extra effort off of their plate, but also, really getting these local leaders and community members to start thinking about what is it that we need? How can we better engage the business event community in these conversations so that we're all mutually benefiting? And events just aren't showing up on someone's doorstep with a bunch of stuff that maybe they don't really even need.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, just to go back to, kind of the regeneration word again is like, you know, maybe something for event professionals to think about is rather than coming into your kind of your event sustainability strategy in terms of like, what are the actions that I'm going to take is like to start from a place of like, how could this be regenerative for our stakeholders, for our company, for our attendees, for the community and the destination that we're going to, for the local vendors that we're going to be working with. Starting from a regeneration place feels to me like, taking this all into a much deeper place.
100%. And I think regeneration is multifaceted, and it's also it doesn't have to be, for example, education and behavior change are huge climate solutions.
Right.
It's not necessarily hands in the soil, which I truly believe hands in the soil is like how we solve the climate crisis, really.
Right.
But
Right.
but for example, if there was an organization that's doing really great work, but they truly just need money, if you were able to give, get each one of your attendees to give $5 to this organization, and then connect the dots of what this organization is doing in the world to regenerate in their, specific space. So many people, the average person really doesn't have an in-depth understanding of the climate crisis and what the solutions are to the problems in which we face. So I think also thinking more dynamically in terms of really prioritizing community needs first, and then figuring out, education is always on the table for any event to be able to incorporate into their programming and into their attendee understanding. And the more that attendees are brought along for these initiatives and conversations, the more included that they feel, and the more connected to the event they also, they feel as well. So I think it's not, it's getting out of the box. And I think that the box is so often created by the fact that we are so limited in our time. So how can we think of our time differently? And I know that sounds maybe lofty, but I think it's connected to the same question you first asked about how can we as individuals prioritize our time and prioritize ourselves differently.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So you mentioned the Democratic National Convention, and I know some of the work you've been doing is pretty high level, and that you were an advisor to the Democratic Convention, for example. Can you tell us a little bit about that work and how you worked with the different constituencies to bring that about?
Absolutely. So I'm local to Chicago, and so the convention was in Chicago. And I approached a woman, Stephanie Katsaros, who owns a company called Brightbeat, who has been doing sustainability work in the local space. Our kids actually went to the same daycare.
Hmm.
Um, she has been in business for 15 years. And so she's done a lot of work with convention centers, stadiums, festivals. She comes from the music space. And
Yeah.
so she has done a lot of waste diversion work. So our work together really provided a lot of comprehensive, a comprehensive approach. So the way that we pitched the DNC was that we were going to reverse engineer our focus based on the top event emissions. And the way that I like to teach that is travel, energy, sourcing, food, waste, water, and social impact. And so it's really like everything we do as professionals can fit into those buckets in one way or another. Of course, sourcing is a massive conversation, super dynamic. Same with food, same with waste. But we were brought in a little bit later than some of the main contractors, but we still were given the reins to make this the most sustainable convention in history, were the words of the executive director. And they, it's critical that leadership be really bought in when you're talking about sustainable innovation, and they were. So it was really cool to be able to work with that. One of the most amazing things that we did, and we did a lot of really cool work, but we measured the attendee travel for the volunteers and for the delegates, which was around 20,000 of the 50,000 people. We were able to get that access to that data. And so we created what was called the Travel Carbon Inset Initiative. And it was a first of its kind initiative where we essentially measured the travel, and then we found a regenerative organic urban farm on the south side of Chicago, and we funded that farm for long-term practices. So they provide CSAs to local community, they employ green jobs, they do a lot of climate education, and frankly, soil and, you know, food systems are huge climate solutions, and also just huge equity solutions. So that was something that was really beautiful. And basically the DNC was able and fortunate to be able to pay the equivalent of that farm supplying the local community with 3,500 CSAs for fresh fruit and vegetables in an area where that's really not as very accessible.
Right.
Was one thing. For energy, we paid for renewable energy certificates equivalent to the footprint of the United Center for 56 days and the McCormick Place for the convention footprint. And we also, the DNC venue team pulled shore power from the United Center out into the parking lot activations. So we were able to avoid about 63,000 gallons of diesel from being used via generators, which was a huge win as well. Sourcing and food was a huge focus. And the way I like to kind of think about food is our food choices. And we were actually able to, we elected with our communication to say, choose chicken over beef.
Right.
And we had over 64% of our entrees were what we would consider low emissions meat choices. McCormick Place was also able to source over 55% of their menu from local sourcing distances, so within 250 miles. And then we rescued 27,000 pounds of food, which fed 23,000 Chicagoans and avoided 93,000 pounds of CO2 from creation in landfill. So, you know, a huge part of our role was educating all the different suppliers and stakeholders of our sustainable intentions, and then communicating that through and really empowering all the different stakeholders to take the reins of their specific roles and execute. And so it was really incredible. We also, sorry, Paul, were you going to say something?
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just like on a roll. We also, so we implemented composting for the first time in history at scale at the arena as well. And we supported educating and training over 1,000 DNC volunteers to act as eco educators at each of the waste stations, which was a huge win. And that was, to me, one of the most moving and amazing, other than the food rescue. And well, actually, it was all beautiful. But these volunteers, the pride and the happiness and the fulfillment that they felt, it really brought me to tears, realizing how much of a well-being impact it is for people to understand this work and also feel like they're making a difference. So that
Right.
was a big aha moment psychologically. We also did water. So we funded water restoration at some very biologically diverse ecosystems that are highly severely at risk. So we funded the water restoration for 375,000 gallons of water. And then we had a really amazing change maker mentorship where we brought in 2 mentees, educated and mentored them, and brought them into our team from the Chicago community to support our program. And they absolutely excelled, and it was a really pretty incredible experience.
Right. So when you say that you reverse engineer it, can you just explain that a little bit more in terms of, does that mean that you reverse engineer it from basically saying, here's our goals and here's how we're going to get there? Or was it more about sitting down with the different stakeholders and constituencies and getting everybody's buy-in? What do you actually mean by reverse engineering it?
So what I mean is, really, typically speaking, for a conference of that size, you're going to see travel is going to be 70 to 90% of the emissions. Energy might be another like 10 to 15%. And then your sourcing, as far as, you know, your materials and your food and your waste, are going to really vary. So that was really the approach we took, is educating people on what are event emissions, what are the
Right.
major concerns that we need to care about, because typically most conferences are not measuring travel, nor are they really even acknowledging it as a part of this situation, when really in reality it's a massive part of it. It's, you know,
Right.
it can be up to 90% of emissions for
Yeah.
largely international crowds.
Yeah.
So that was it, was like really educating. And what was great was we worked with the city of Chicago and their sustainability, the chief sustainability officer, Angela Tovar, and all these amazing city stakeholders. And so when we first were introduced to them, we educated them on, here's how we're going to approach this. We're going to do this by emissions impacts. And that to me was really important, because I think people that don't understand events, they can understand these emissions factors, and they did, and they appreciated it. They're like, wow, okay, you guys know what you're doing. And, you know, it engendered this trust and this understanding that, okay, we can understand that too. Even though
Yeah.
we might not understand how to plan events, we know that travel, energy sourcing, you know, we understand these aspects. So that is kind of the way I like to teach it, is by emissions impacts, because I think it's easier to understand.
Right. Right. Um, Yeah, I love that approach, and I've mentioned this a number of times before on on some of these podcasts. One of the things I've always advocated is bringing together all of the various different stakeholders and doing some education and goal setting. And that once you get buy-in from everybody, to your point, at the end of it, everybody can feel a certain amount of acknowledgement and pride, or just gratitude for the work that's being done. Um, so another question I might have is, this sounds amazing, lots of great stats. Was any of this documented in a way that could be shared out to the broader community?
Paul, yeah, you are singing, like, this is exactly what I am looking to. I cannot wait to share. We have basically, I think it's like a 50-page report. I
Okay.
mean, we have a massive report that goes into every single one of these details and then some, which it should be getting shared out relatively soon, because the convention itself is typically a temporary website.
Right.
Um, they are going to be housing it, I believe, on Choose Chicago, our local CVB and tourism, there on their website for hopefully eternity. And that was important to us, that because when we were, initially researching other conventions and trying to get baseline statistics, it was hard to find a lot of data. But
Yeah.
our goal is that this is the baseline, this is the data, it lives in eternity, and now we can 2028 and forevermore. Basically, at the end of the report, we say, well, this was the most sustainable convention, just as everyone after that will be. And, as we continue in our industry, every convention is going to be a sustainable convention, so but yes, that will live on.
Great. That's great to hear. And I hope that once it is published, I hope that somebody, whether it's you or whether it's Chicago, puts out some public announcement about it to where people can go and read it, because it's so important for us to kind of learn from each other. One thing I'm sort of curious about that we used to always do in our reports for Oracle Open World was to have a section about, here's the things that did not necessarily work that we want to work on next time, as another kind of learning tool for people. And I'm wondering whether you took that approach at all in the report.
We sure did. And that there's not like a call out section, but basically throughout all
Yeah.
sections,
Uh-huh.
it will say, this would have improved data collection, or this would have helped with this. And really there are learnings, frankly, throughout.
Right.
So I definitely agree with that. And I think that is so critical to baselining, right? Is you need the data. Um, but but yes, it is sprinkled throughout.
Great. So the other, let's talk a little bit more about purpose, and kind of one of your companies or one of your initiatives is kind of this idea of purpose net zero. I don't think a lot of people understand what net zero really is and how it ties together to purpose. How are you explaining the idea or practicality of net zero to your clients and the importance of working towards a net zero mentality?
Oh man, Paul, this is such a good one. So Purpose Net Zero is basically a API, which is tech talk for a tiny piece of technology that integrates with the event registration process. And the intention was that during the event registration process, people could give their zip code and their three modes of transportation. So for example, I'm going to San Diego, I would take a train to a plane to a train to get
Mhm.
to my destination. So it's intending to measure that 70 to 90% of emissions associated with the travel journey, and that's it. And the reason why I created that was simply I looked around and I couldn't find something that was simple or easy. It felt like I would live in spreadsheet land, which is frankly the last place that I want to live. And so I found a developer and created this tool. I wish I would have never named it Purpose Net Zero. It was frankly at a time where I was extremely aspirational around my own abilities to affect change, but also just this concept of removing carbon. And as I mentioned, like the more you get into sustainable evolution, regenerative system thinking, the more you see sort of the holes and the mistakes. Obviously, net zero in theory is really just measuring, witnessing, understanding our impacts, and then trying to neutralize them so that they're not at a place of degradation to the environment. And we're so far from people actually acknowledging their impacts to begin with, that this notion of net zero and that we can just like, pay for some offsets over here to like negate our conference over here, it's just not really mapping out in the way that it really, I think, was intended. And frankly, I think it's so much more about responsibility and accountability for recognizing impacts, acknowledging impacts. For example, travel is an impact. It always will be. It's part of the way that, we gather works. And I'm a deep believer in human connection. But, you know, when we travel, that is something we must acknowledge. And as organizers, I've seen a lot of resistance to that acknowledgement. And frankly, there's no one that doesn't understand that that's true. So anyway, I wish I would have never named it that, but at the same time, I think that Purpose Net Zero, while it is not widely adopted in this moment, I hope and believe it has a place for event registration company, a software company, or some person, place, or thing that can use this as a tool to support their business in being more sustainable and conscious and providing their clients with simpler ways to understand this important information.
So since it's basically a little piece of software, an API, is it pluggable into existing kind of calculators like the Iowa Trace calculator or the Meet Green calculator or any of the other, the UN Global Compact calculator, any of those?
I wish. I mean, theoretically, it can be.
Yeah.
It's an API, so it can plug into anything as long as it's, linked up. Right
Right.
now, it's connected to Cvent and Swoogo.
Yeah.
And frankly, I am just kind of sitting on it to try to figure out where does this best serve humanity. I created it again to just like solve my own problem, but I'm not a tech developer, nor am I like a founder of tech. So I don't really, I'm kind
Yeah.
of just trying to see where is this useful. And I love those other calculators. I love the team over at Trace, at Isla, and we measure things differently as far as travel goes. So I think it's just a matter of time before I figure out where it fits. Because what I have seen consistently, and I would love to know from your community if they're seeing otherwise, I haven't seen any event registration companies or big, event tech software getting into sustainability. Like sustainable innovation to support the tweaks that can be made, and I see can be made easily within some of these softwares that can support more conscious outcomes, such as measuring travel and other things. But I'm not their customer, so I'm not, I guess, as intimately familiar with what's happening in that space.
Yeah, having come from, a tech company, there were certainly efforts to integrate sustainability into software, but not specifically for the event community necessarily. So I'd be interested myself if anybody is doing that. But beyond that little piece of software, I am sort of interested in terms of like your consulting work and your workshops that you're doing and your educational. What you're talking to people about relative to managing emissions or managing sustainability or just kind of like how to think about net zero again within more of a strategic perspective as opposed to just oh, just go off and do carbon offsets and you'll be fine.
Totally. I mean, so what I have a number of courses that I've created, and the main one is the Purpose Sustainable Event Strategy Accreditation.
Mhm.
And it's a 6-hour fully digital course that is self-paced, and it's designed for organizations to really scale this foundational understanding. The way that I teach it is really just as I mentioned, with that reverse engineering of emissions as sort of the baseline of the foundation. And then there's a 5-phase approach, which is define, plan, procure, execute, and reflect. And then everything that we do as event planners and organizers goes into that 5-phased
Yeah,
approach. So it's
yeah,
really attempting to simplify these very complex uh topics and scientific understanding of what are emissions and what's the current status, but also there's a lot of interweaving of empathy and kind of really trying to connect also people to the sentience of nature and um reconnect us to just this deeper meaning within the work that we do, but also within the planet that we live. So that's like the main offering. And then from there, I have a sustainable lifestyle course that's super accessible. It's a 4-week journey and it's very similar. It's like how to live more sustainably, what choices to make, but also how to reconnect to nature and reconnect with yourself and be really kind and soft to yourself. Um,
right.
I also have a course on event emissions 101 and fast track food rescue to help caterers and food service companies fast track their understanding and ability to really get surplus food into the local community without affecting their bottom line. So it's like about business model innovation. But really, like, I'm just trying to figure out what the world needs and what I can provide, because I feel as if I have a lot to share and a lot to offer, and I want to be able to support people, and it feels almost as if supporting people more in their interpersonal lives and empathy is having more of an effect than
Right.
maybe a lot of these other more operationally focused initiatives.
Yeah, no, I think that that's right. I mean, I think we both recognize that from an operation standpoint, there's already so much information out there. I mean, you can go on the web and find pretty much anything that you want to know from an operational standpoint, whether it be, the UN guide or Meet Green's guide to, or books that are out there. Operationally, I don't think we're lacking for information, but I think that, yeah, we're at this point where, um, we need to get in kind of in touch with like how we feel about all of this at this point, especially given, some of the politics that are going on, not just in the United States, but around the world. Um, the fact that we are quickly approaching and probably will exceed the UN's guidelines for temperature around the world.
Mhm.
So there's a lot, that we have to kind of like take in as event professionals and just as human beings to kind of think about how we're gonna deal with all of this. And so I want to acknowledge the work that you're doing around all of that. And Is there anything more that you would want to say, based on what we talked about at the Chase Center event, for those that maybe weren't there, just kind of some of your thoughts about kind of where we are right now and what we talked about at the Chase event that, would be useful to people right now as they're kind of like getting ready for 2025 and really for the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing that we really haven't discussed today that I think was a big part of the conversation that deeply affected people was really about grief.
Yeah.
And the Kubler-Ross
Hmm.
chart of grief, the 5 stages of grief, is so, like, I've talked about that on my Instagram relative to climate, but climate grief is extremely real. Climate anxiety is extremely real, and also climate injustice. And so one thing in my education around degrowth is happiness in a country is most directly related to a perception of equity. And in the United States, happiness has steadily decreased since the 1950s. And
Hmm.
that's also been, obviously in relationship with the extreme wealth inequity of the country. So understanding that climate injustice and, injustice of any kind deeply affects all of us, regardless of if we have more privilege or not. So I personally have identified periods in my career, and I talked about this in San Francisco, about deeply, deeply going through a dark night of the soul and being, I call it, dark night of the soul, ego death. Really, the hardest time of my life was this last fall. And to recognize that I was in deep anger about the work that I'm trying to do and feeling like it's not doing anything, and also depression about that grappling with that fact. And because I do so much inner work and have a lot of awareness of what I'm feeling and allow myself to feel those feelings, I was fortunate to be able to, like, literally let that smash through my body, let that, overtake me in ways that I could get it out of my system and come back to trust in my heart and compassion for myself and compassion for the world and empathy for everyone, because I really believe that we are all here on this, in this human experience, to feel every variation of emotion, not just the happiness, not just the joy, not just the pleasure. Those are all amazing, but, like, what about the heart-wrenching, gutting sadness and the anger? Like, we need to feel those too. So I think it's just really healthy to think about those stages of grief, and where and if you might be in a stage relative to climate, and work on how you can systematically find a professional or seek support, in variations of ways, to get through to acceptance, because I deeply believe that's where hope and activism live.
Yeah. I think that's a great place to stop. I think we need some hope. We need some activism at this point. Marley, thank you so much. This has been a fantastic conversation. So thank you all for listening. And again, Patio Perspectives is a mostly monthly series that we're doing where we interview thought leaders in the sustainability space. Again, thanks to Marley Finnegan for taking the time today, and we will see you in the next episode. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Paul. So great to be with you. Appreciate you.